Good evening, everybody. Whether you're on half term this week or you had half term last week, I hope it's a good one for you all. And thank you for coming to our TeachMeet for intervention and top tips for intervention. Just introduce you a few people who are in the room with us today. Obviously, we've got Helen Collins, who will introduce herself very soon and tell you where she's come from in the past and what she's doing now. And then we've got the Twinkl TeachMeet team who are here. That includes me. I'm the CPD and TeachMeet manager for Twinkl. And then we've also got our teaching assistant team who are with us somewhere in this room of 121 currently, and more popping in as they come along. What I've put in the chat so far is a little Jamboard. Hopefully you can get onto it and ask any questions you can there, and we will get back to you with the answers, whether that be direct via email or not, or through the Jamboard itself. Also, during the meeting, we'll be putting some resources onto the chat function whilst Helen is talking. And these are all resources that support what Helen is describing to you at the time. If you want to save those, it might be worth just clicking on them so you can get straight into it. Andrea has a question already. Andrea.
No, sorry, I pressed the wrong button.
It's okay,
sorry.
Don't worry at all. Don't worry at all. The delay was a clue, I think. Thank you, Andrea. Right, Helen, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to move on to another slide. Hope everyone's well. Good evening. Welcome to this Intervention TeachMeet. So my name is Helen. I am a content writer and editor for Twinkl CPD. Before joining Twinkl, I'd worked in education for about 10 years. I've been an adult education teacher, primary and secondary TA, specialist learning support assistant for speech, language and communication needs, and a HLTA. And within my HLTA role, I led a team of incredible teaching assistants, and we delivered interventions across the whole school, sometimes working with up to 80 children in a week. So it was pretty intense. So I do know where you're all coming from. I have been in the role. I do understand the bits that go along with being a TA, whether that's TA, LSA, HLTA. Whenever I make reference to teaching assistants throughout tonight's session, it is inclusive of all variations of the role. I've also been an EAL coordinator, and I'm currently SEN Pupil Premium and EYFS Link Governor Primary School. So this evening's TeachMeet is written from my personal experience as an SEN specialist HLTA. I'm passionate about delivering successful interventions and showing outcomes and impact from them. I'm also incredibly passionate about supporting teaching assistants. I have been there, I do get it, I know how hard you all work. You're all doing an incredible job, sometimes in very difficult circumstances, and I hope that you all find the information in tonight's session useful and empowering. So feel free to pop questions into the chat or onto the Jamboard. I think Matt's just shared another link to the Jamboard, so hopefully you'll all be able to pop onto that. And yeah, if at the end we will have a Q&A, so hopefully if we get a chance, depending on time, we might have some answers to some of those questions at the end of the session. So let's move on. So this TeachMeet will cover interventions. We'll be looking at an overview of interventions. We'll then move on to top tips for delivering successful interventions. And we'll apply those top tips to an intervention so that you can see how that works in practice. And then we've got some time for questions at the end. So interventions. Why do we run interventions? Planning interventions, and how are children identified for intervention? So we run interventions once we've acknowledged that there's gaps in knowledge or skills. Once those have been identified, we run interventions to address the gaps. We support children in small groups or individually to overcome barriers to learning. School-based interventions can come in many forms and should always be used alongside quality first teaching. They can and should be delivered by teachers and teaching assistants. Don't know whether that's something that you experience in your school. Some schools do. I would imagine the majority of you don't find that's what happens, but that can and does happen sometimes. So who identifies the children and how do they identify the children for intervention? Children may have been identified for intervention in a range of ways. During pupil progress meetings, teachers can raise concerns about a child's progress in a particular area. Monitoring and moderation sessions between teachers and senior leaders can spot areas of concern. Recent assessments may have highlighted a need for support in a particular area. Formal assessments by school or external agencies might have led to specialist intervention being recommended. For example, a speech and language assessment may recommend targeted support in the form of one-to-one intervention through school. Children's individual pupil SEN plan targets might need intervention to support. So the targets will be quality first teaching or support in class, and other support might be highlighted as needing one-to-one or small group intervention. Might also be working on EHCP targets with the children. So planning interventions. Are you given time to plan? Some TAs are given plenty of time to plan. It's very, very useful to have that time. Even if the intervention that you're using is scripted, it's very important that you're given time to look through that and to plan what resources you'll need. So even intervention programs that your school buys in need preparation time. You should not be expected to run an intervention without being given time to read, research, and upskill yourself so you feel confident and prepared. Running an intervention without seeing it is really, really hard work. Printing, laminating, finding resources, it all takes time. If you're not given time to plan and resource your intervention, please request it. This time should be given in school hours. I know that's easier said than done, but in an ideal world, that should be given in school hours. Ideally, when the teacher's on PPA, on planning time, so you can discuss interventions with them. It's really important that communication between teacher and teaching assistant is well thought through, time is used well, and if you've got questions about an intervention, that you have the opportunity to raise them with the teacher. Everyone's busy, and the most productive use of time is for the intervention to run smoothly, help the children, and show progress the first time. It doesn't happen without preparation. So throughout the session, I will touch on the graduated approach. Although it refers to the cycle that we use to support children with SEN, its principles are vital throughout delivery of interventions. The vast majority of children accessing interventions will be doing so as part of SEN support. So being aware of how the graduated approach is how it works is really important. The graduated approach is a continuous cycle of support which is reviewed, adapted and refined to give children the best chance to make good progress and to secure good outcomes. If a child does not make progress within 3 cycles of the graduated approach, the school will need evidence to submit with an EHCP request. Your intervention records may form a key part of this. Okay, so we're going to move on to the top tips. Top tip number 1 is knowing who. Okay, knowing who. So you'll need to know who you'll be supporting, which children are accessing the intervention, and who is delivering the sessions. So basics such as names of the children, year groups, but you also need specifics. What are the children's individual needs? What are the SEN needs? Any neurodiversity, any physical disabilities? If you're working in a small school, there's a good chance that you'll know a lot of the children. Working in a big school, it can be more difficult to get that information. So again, communication with the teachers is absolutely vital. So any of these needs could impact the timings or location of your session. So for example, if you're working with a child with ADHD, they might become very unsettled if they have to miss PE to come out to do a maths intervention. That can be made even worse if the room that you're in with that child is facing directly onto the playground where the PE lesson is happening. So it's definitely worth bearing in mind the needs of individual children when it comes to your interventions. Have the children accessed this or any intervention before? Do they know what to expect from interventions? The likelihood is that children you're working with, this will not be the only intervention that they're accessing or have accessed in the past. So which other interventions are they accessing? When are they? What are they? And who runs them? Gathering as much information as possible about the children you support. Who will deliver the sessions? Will it be split between yourself and another teaching assistant? How will you communicate and record concerns, progress and attitude from session to session? Especially if you're splitting the sessions with another teaching assistant, how do you communicate from yourself to the other teaching assistant so you know how their sessions are going alongside yours? This one's a really important point. So who will see your paperwork? Who will see the information that you record about the children who are accessing your intervention? So certainly the teacher, the SENCO, parents potentially have access to the intervention paperwork, external agencies. So there's a huge range of people who could see your paperwork. So it's important that the paperwork that you record, the progress, attitude and attainment of the children within your intervention, it's really important that the terminology that you use on that is professional at all times. So the best way to do that is to put yourself in the parent's shoes. What would you want to read about your child on an intervention? That's not necessarily about the progress, but certainly the attitude and attendance of the interventions. As a parent, you would want to read professional, well-written, well-recorded intervention information. So the way we do that is with our feedback sandwich. It's positive, constructive, positive feedback. So it doesn't need to be long, doesn't need to be detailed. We'll try to use and instead of but. But can have quite negative connotations when we're talking about feedback. Or we finish one sentence and start a new one rather than it being too long a feedback sentence. So thinking about the child that we mentioned earlier who had ADHD, we could use the example, Molly stayed focused throughout the session, positive. Next session, Molly will try to start work as soon as she arrives, constructive. Lovely manners today, Molly, positive. So we've created a really, still fairly short, it could be far shorter still, but it is still fairly short, that positive, constructive, positive feedback. So anybody that reads that can see that you've taken the time to find those positives, which are so important, especially if the intervention isn't going quite how you'd like it to, still finding those positives is really, really important. So even if the target for that session wasn't met, or you feel that in that session you haven't maybe made as much progress towards the final target as you would have liked, that's not a reflection on you or the intervention. It does need recording that that progress hasn't been made, but putting it in this way makes it much more personable, it's far friendlier, but keeping that professional dialogue. So, sorry, I've lost my cursor, I'm back. The last point on top tip 1, knowing who is responsible for progress. So this is a really important one. You should be able to tell any member of staff who asks how things are going. Your intervention, your recording of the intervention, of the progress session to session, of the attitude and attendance of the children who are coming to your intervention. You should have access to written records showing each child's interaction with the intervention. So this is keeping your record keeping up to date. And each session should have a comment recorded about the child's progress, individual child, how the session went for them. So use engagement and attitude until there's clear progress towards the target. The final entry on the record should always be about the target. Was the target met? So throughout the intervention process, responsibility for progress remains with the teacher. We know that TA is going above and beyond in their role to support children and colleagues. We know you're passionate about supporting children and often take on responsibilities beyond your role. We know that you work incredibly hard, and we feel it's important that you know, ultimately, the teacher is responsible. So I've taken some excerpts there from the SEN Code of Practice. I'm just going to give you a minute to read through those. They make very important points. You should always feed back to the teacher if you have concerns about a child for their attainment, attitude, or attendance. Your role in interventions is to do the best intervention that you can. Record what you do and then report the outcomes. So top tip number 2, we need to know why. Why is this child accessing the intervention? Why this intervention? And why now? So we've looked at the child's basic information and we've spoken about gathering as much detail as possible about the individual children accessing the intervention. Now we need to explore why they're here. So group interventions, one-to-one, SATS boosters, phonics screener boosters, nurture sessions, reading, maths, speech and language, the list goes on. But you need to know why you are running the intervention you're running and why we're running it now. So I'm just going to read an example to you. This is going to follow us through the rest of the session. So Sophie's teacher is concerned that lengthy pieces of writing in year 6 are causing Sophie some difficulties. This was also spotted during internal moderation within the English team and in a book look by SLT. Her written pieces are considerably shorter than her peers. Sophie's self-confidence is a concern. Her ideas are great and her planning and thought processes are clear, but the speed she writes is making it difficult for her to get her ideas down on paper. Sophie's teacher has requested a handwriting intervention to support Sophie. There may be other children in year 6 who would benefit from this support too. So the intervention that we've chosen focuses on increasing writing speed. We're going to use different mediums such as chalk, charcoal, pens, different papers, boards, explore seating positions, and then we're going to identify what it is that's slowing this child down in terms of their handwriting speed. It might be the pressure they're putting on the paper. It might be that the child has hypermobility. We need to explore why this child is here. Why now? So now is the perfect time for Sophie to start the intervention. By the end of this half term, she'll have completed the intervention. Hopefully her writing speed will have increased and her self-confidence will have improved. Writing demands from here on in year 6 will increase. So at this point, it's worth mentioning that in terms of prioritising, obviously some interventions will have a time limit on them. So things like SATs or phonics boosters will take higher priority than something like a handwriting intervention. In this case, we're saying this is the highest priority intervention for this child at the moment. So this is not really a why, more a why not. So why not link the intervention to something that's being taught in class? Again, this is something that's picked out by the SEN Code of Practice. This is not your responsibility to implement it, but discussions around this could potentially help in terms of giving you a focus for your intervention in terms of the topic that you cover in the writing. There might be an aspect of history or geography currently being studied in class that would work quite well in your handwriting intervention. Top tip 3, we need to know how. Some interventions will have all this information in them. So how many sessions, how long each session is going to be, how long the intervention will run for. If the intervention doesn't have this information, who makes that decision? It might be that you make the decision how long your sessions are going to be. It might be that your timetable dictates how long the sessions are going to be. It might be that the teacher plans that for you, or the SENCO, depending how much timetabling is done for your interventions. You might find that it's down to you to make that decision. So in this case, we need to decide whether running a 10-minute intervention once a week is likely to show progress, or whether a 20-minute session twice a week, is that achievable? Do we have time in our timetable? It might show the biggest impact, the better outcomes, but do we realistically have time to fit that much in? So balancing interventions with everything else that you do, you have to decide if the time you're dedicating to this particular intervention is achievable. Because as we all know, missing sessions to do something else, potentially deemed a higher priority and not necessarily by you, can be really frustrating for everyone involved. So when everything feels like it's top priority, it's really easy to feel overwhelmed. So make sure that you're setting yourself realistic timeframes, realistic time expectations. And if somebody does timetable your interventions, tell them if it's too much. If your interventions aren't timetabled, it might be something that's worth discussing with the teacher or SENCO, because it's important that everyone involved knows children are, when children are accessing interventions, making sure there's no clashes between other interventions. As a TA, I remember there being nothing more frustrating than going to a classroom to collect a child for intervention and they were already out on another intervention. It can be incredibly difficult to balance everything that we have to do. And sometimes a basic timetable to show everybody which children are out doing which intervention at which time can be a really, really good idea. Top tip number 4, know the focus. So what is the focus of the intervention? What will the child or children learn? What is the intended outcome? And what do I need in order to deliver the best possible intervention? So we've established that the focus for our intervention this evening is handwriting. We're looking at writing speed. We've taken time to have those discussions about the children who are attending and what we're hoping that the outcomes will be. So what we need to think about now is if there are any limitations. So what do I need in order to make this the best possible intervention? Is there an area that you might need advice with? Is there something that's come up through discussions with teachers that's raised something that you've gone, oh, I really could do with talking to somebody about that before I run this intervention? Do you know where the resources are kept? Is there anything that you're looking for that you can't find? Did you discuss with the teacher about links to classroom work? So this example obviously is handwriting. That's the example we're going to go with all evening to keep everything in the same line. But the principles of the interventions are all the same. The focus of the intervention must be clear. Top tip number 5, set SMART targets. So what are SMART targets? Have we all heard of SMART targets before? We're going to do a little trial. So down at the bottom of your screen, there's a little hand symbol. If you know what SMART targets are, give me a wave with your little hand symbol. Oh, fantastic. Absolutely brilliant. Okay, fab. You can pop your hands down again. Thank you. So for those of you who haven't heard, and for a refresher for those that have, a SMART target is a specific, oh, I love it when emojis come up. Thank you. A specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound target. It's a bit of a mouthful. That's why they're SMART targets. Okay, so we're going to look at some examples of SMART targets, because targets, it becomes second nature to set them for children within your interventions. And being able to track a SMART target, thank you again for the emojis, they're lovely. To be able to track progress by using a SMART target becomes so much easier. Okay, so we're going to have a look through some examples now. So this is an example that is not a SMART target, so that I can show you the worst example before I get to showing you the better ones. So by Easter, HM will know all their times tables. It's time bound, but other than that, it is not detailed enough. It would be hard to measure because it's so huge. It's not achievable. So its only real positive there is that it's time bound. We've got by Easter, which makes it a time bound target. So we've made it better. By Easter, HM will be able to recite the 2 times table correctly 80% of the time in a one-to-one session with an adult. Okay, so that I've tried to color code it. Hopefully you'll well be able to see that, so that you can see how each of the areas of SMART target is achieved within that target there. So let's have a look at another one. TR will correctly use the past tense of the verb play 80% of the time during a controlled intervention. So this one has pretty much everything, but isn't time bound. So having something in there about the length of time you're going to give the child to show progress is the time bound element. So there we have time bound within the 6-week period. PL will increase writing speed by 5 words per minute. It's achievable. It's relevant to what the concern that's been raised and the reason that the child's attending the intervention. And then we've got one more. By the end of this half term, JO will have increased his word per minute reading rate from 50 to 55. So we've got time bound, it's specific, it's relevant to the need, and most importantly of all, it's measurable. There's something there that will tell us at the end of the intervention whether the child has met their target. So top tip number 6, we're getting into actually delivering the intervention. So we've done all our preparation, we're now ready to deliver. So we're going to use that hand again. Do you have a room dedicated to running interventions? So the hand symbol at the bottom again. If you have a room that you use just for interventions, pop your hand up. Oh, a few, yeah, absolutely. The sad emojis tell me the story. So yeah, a few of you do. It's a very enviable position to be in, to have a room for interventions. I know some people with their emojis can't believe that some of you are that lucky to have an intervention room. It's massive. If you have somewhere that you can dedicate to running interventions, it's huge. So for the people that don't have that, and the people that do, there's always alternatives to the room you've been dedicated. Where do we run them? I know from experience, we run them in corridors, empty classrooms, staff rooms, dining hall, library, anywhere we can find a space that will work for the time that we need it for. Having a suitable place is really important. It doesn't have to be the same place every day. It doesn't have to be an intervention room, but having somewhere suitable is really important. It's often overlooked by schools, and as teaching assistants, it's very frustrating. It's very frustrating when you think you have somewhere to go and you get there and somebody else is there. It's also frustrating when things like school photos happen, and you know that normally you would be using the hall on a Wednesday morning for phonics, and the school photos happen and there's really nowhere else to go. I did actually just see somebody put in the chat, it goes up very fleetingly past my eyes while I'm talking, somebody put playground. We're going to move on to that. So as we've already discussed, preparation is vital. So planning where the interventions happen could be part of the timetabling process. Maybe, as it probably is in most schools, it's first come, first served. But wherever they're run, interventions need to be well run and effective. So as soon as a child meets their targets, they can move on to the next step, whether that's another target on the same intervention, another intervention, or in-class support. So where do we deliver sessions? So I've had a look at that. Can we make sessions more active? So if you have an opportunity, can you get outside for some of your interventions? Now, obviously, this won't work for every intervention, wouldn't necessarily work for handwriting unless you're working on motor skills, but taking speech and language sessions, phonics sessions, maths boosters outside is a great way to learn, and it can be really fun. It gets kids excited and active while they're learning. It improves engagement. It often doesn't feel like work. It feels like they're outside having fun, and other children will want to do it. If they can see children outside doing an intervention, genuinely, we used to get stopped in the corridor and asked if people could join our intervention groups because they saw how much fun we were having outside. So we know that TAs are great at creative delivery and tailoring that support to individual needs of the children. Getting outside can be just another tool that you have in your toolkit. So here's some suggestions from my time as a teaching assistant. We used to run phonics boosters outside, where we'd ask the child to kick a football at a phonics sound card and say that sound. Maths boosters, you could throw a beanbag at two numbers, add them together, subtract them, multiply them, depending on the needs and the target for the child. You could draw two chalk circles on the playground and separate prime and not prime numbers. Just remember to collect evidence. You need to show in every intervention, whether it's inside or outside, they didn't know it, they came on the intervention, and now they do. And if at the end of it they don't, that's okay too. But you must remember to collect evidence. So that can be photos, it can be pupil voice. So TS told me that they're proud of themselves today for knowing their 2 times tables. PD successfully recognised all prime numbers to 13 and told me, yeah, I did it. This kind of thing is so important in the recording of your intervention and looking at the outcomes and the impact. Now, I can't run an intervention webinar without mentioning behaviour. We're not going to dwell on it tonight. Isn't about behaviour, it is about the interventions, but I think it's important to just point out, really, school rules and expectations should apply within your intervention, absolutely. Knowing the children and their individual needs is essential. In most circumstances, sitting still and maintaining eye contact are not essential intervention behaviours. Okay. We need to have high expectations for engagement, manners, turn taking, whether that's with you in a one-to-one session or whether that's in a group session. Listening to instructions, being kind are the kind of things that we should be looking for in every intervention. So we've done delivery. Now it's time to report and feedback. So is it an outcome or an impact? And what's the difference? An outcome is linked to the intervention. So the outcome is the specific and measurable short-term effect. This is what you'll see in the intervention. This is what you will report on in the intervention. The impact is a broader, longer-term effect. Interventions have the opportunity to deliver both. We're going to expand on that further slightly later. But reporting outcomes is about the SMART target. So by the end of the 6-week handwriting intervention, SP was able to write 5 more words per minute during the structured intervention session. The impact of that would be that they were able to create an independent piece of written work in class using the skills that they've acquired through intervention. So this isn't necessarily up to you to report or feedback on, but it is something that while you're running your intervention, in the back of your mind, you're always thinking about those transferable skills, making sure that what you're teaching them in intervention is going to help them in the classroom. And feeding back to the teacher, you don't always have to give written feedback to the teacher. They must know the outcomes of the intervention. They must know whether targets are met. Teachers must have access to the intervention records, but it's okay to have that discussion or to simply hand them a sticky note telling them what's happened in the intervention. As long as they've got access to the paperwork, they've got everything they need, because your paperwork is recording and reporting on what's happened in your sessions. If all else fails, hand the teacher the intervention record and say, give me a shout if there's anything you need to discuss. You at that point have done everything you need to do. You've run your intervention, you've collected the evidence, you've looked at the outcome, and you've handed it to the teacher. Okay, so we're going to put these into the actual handwriting intervention now, so we can fly through this bit a little bit. So we know who, how, and what the focus is for our handwriting intervention. We've identified Sophie's need for an intervention, and some other children have been added. So we've now got 4 children in year 6. All the sessions will be run by 1 TA, and the TA is going to set the target. We know how we're going to do it. It'll be 2 20-minute sessions per week for 6 weeks. And we'll be giving written feedback to the teacher at week 6. And the focus is to increase writing speed to enable the participants to write more in a given task or time frame. So before session 1, these are the things we need to do before we even set out our intervention. So we need to know what we need and where to find it. So resources, we went through these slightly earlier, looking at what we would need. So do you have a room, a cupboard, a shelf? How are you going to transport everything you need if you need quite a lot of things? Do you have a trolley, a box, an apron, possibly a desk tidy? However you transport the resources about, now's the time to find your resources and to get prepared. So what if, for this intervention, we don't have any chalk? Now, we know that the school can order the chalk, and sometimes, we've all been there, we decide that it would be quicker and easier to spend our own money on a pack of chalk. Please don't. If resources are needed for an intervention, it's up to the school to provide them. And if there's no resources, there's no intervention. The school want that intervention to run, and they want you to run it. That doesn't mean you need to go out and fund it. Okay, so some useful phrases. We need whatever for this intervention to be successful. The intervention cannot run unless we have some whatever. Once the has arrived, I can successfully run the intervention. It's all about this intervention being successful, and if the chalk is part of that, then that's what we need to ask for. I know some of you are laughing. I know, and I know it's hard. It's something that, as a teaching assistant, we only ever want what's best for the children. I get that, I genuinely do. But the school as a whole needs to understand that for interventions to be successful, resources will be needed. So if there's something that you need that you don't have, please do ask for somebody to arrange for it to be bought in. Okay. So this last little bit at the bottom, we're going to discuss this a bit later on. take a photograph or photocopy of each child's work before you start the intervention. So before session 1, take a photograph or a photocopy of a child's work from their book from in class. So we looked at SMART targets. We're now going to look at setting those SMART targets for individual children. We're going to do a pre-intervention assessment, which will show us what their individual needs are. Then we're going to set the target. So the specific part of the target is about writing speed. So we're going to ask the children to write about a hobby for 2 minutes. This is their pre-intervention assessment. We're going to count the number of words and divide it by 2. This gives you the number of words per minute. This will be used again at the post-intervention assessment to show outcomes and progress. The measurable part of the target, we'd like them to increase their writing speed by 6 words per minute. Again, we'll use the post-intervention assessment to measure the outcome. Achievable. 6 words per minute might be achievable for some children. It depends on their starting point. We can't just say 6 words per minute for everybody. We need to pick a sensible, achievable, individual target for each child. Children should be expected to work hard towards a target, but it must be achievable within the time scale. It must be relevant. So setting a child a writing speed target if they can't use finger spaces consistently and independently is not the most relevant target at this time. It might be that once they've mastered finger spaces, they do move on to a handwriting intervention, but it's about making it the most relevant it can be for that child at this time. It must be time bound. So you would have within 6 weeks, by a specific date, by the end of term, by the end of half term. So here's our target. Within 6 weeks, SP will increase their writing speed by 6 words per minute during an adult-led intervention session. Now we're going to run the sessions. So we're going to crack on with our handwriting interventions. We're going to have high expectations, awareness that sitting position has an impact on handwriting. We're going to keep an eye on progress, and if the target's met early, we need to decide what we're going to do. Are they going to move on to a different target? This is again a discussion to have with the teacher. What happens if they meet that target early? Will any of the children need a pencil grip or a sloped writing board? Don't forget to collect evidence, 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 and keep in mind they didn't know it and now they do. So measuring the outcomes. We're going to repeat the pre-intervention assessment to show outcomes. So the post-intervention assessment is exactly the same as the pre-intervention assessment. They choose to write about a topic, a hobby, for 2 minutes. At the end of that, you divide the words, you count up how many words they've written, you divide that by 2, and that gives you words per minute. We're hoping to see a 6 word per minute increase. Okay. So did they meet their individual target? Then we're going to plan next steps. Again, discussion with the teacher. There might be another intervention that they now need to move on to that's been deemed the priority after the handwriting intervention. It might be that they stay on the handwriting intervention with a new target. If the target wasn't met, what's important is the recording of why the target wasn't met. So was it engagement? Was it attendance? Was the child doing too many interventions in one cycle? Was the target too big? Be as specific as you can be in your recording and feedback, because it will help to develop best practice and inform intervention planning moving forward. Don't forget the hints before about recording using professional terminology, but be honest. A child not meeting a target is not a reflection of you, how you ran the intervention, or how good you are at your job. Some children won't make progress, and that's okay. But gathering the evidence and recording it, and feeding it back to the teacher or Senko is absolutely key. So then, we need to reflect. Be reflective about your intervention. What went well? What can be improved for another time? If you don't personally run this intervention again, what advice would you give to the next TA to run it? Now, we've finished the intervention. We've looked at the outcomes. Now we're going to look at the impact. So meeting targets is obviously important. That's the outcome. The outcome is whether they met their target. But the key to a successful intervention is that the skills are transferable. Take the handwriting intervention example. It's great that Sophie can now write 6 more words per minute in a handwriting intervention, but what about in class? Independent written work is where we really want to see progress. That was the point of the intervention. It was identified in class that there was a concern. Now we have to make sure that what's been learnt in the intervention can be put into practice in class. So the child that we mentioned earlier about reciting the 2 times tables, they can now do it 80% of the time in a controlled environment, one-to-one with a TA. That's fantastic. They met their target. But can they recite it in class with their teacher? Can they use their newfound knowledge to answer mathematical questions? The skills that they learn in intervention, the impact of that is whether it can be used long-term in a different scenario, using it in class. So the child doing the phonics booster outside, they can now use the sound in an intervention, but can they say it in class? Can they tell others about the sound? Can they use the sound successfully in a word? So the impact of what we're doing needs to be measured from in class. And again, that's not something that you need to measure, but it's nice to be aware of the impact that you have had through that intervention in supporting that child in their individual needs and difficulties in class. So we're almost at the end. We've flown through it. We've done really well considering we're a couple of minutes late starting. So we were, before this session, we were sent some questions from some teaching assistants, which I have tried to cover. I've tried to cover these. Sorry, I clicked the wrong button. I've tried to cover them across the session, but there were some I know that I didn't manage to fit into the slides. So this session is focused on planning an intervention, setting SMART targets, delivering the intervention and tracking progress, outcomes and impact. Some of these questions have been answered, some haven't, so I'll do my best now. Where possible, Matt is going to drop some links into the chat for us to support the answers to the questions. And you probably wouldn't have much time by this point, so here we go. So we've covered intended outcomes and showing that the child has achieved them. We've covered setting targets for an intervention. Balancing time I spend on interventions is always going to be difficult, and hopefully timetabling is potentially an idea you can take to your school to look at whether that's something they could support. What's the correct terminology for use for neurodiversity? It can be very complicated. I know one of the resources Matt's going to drop in there for you is about neurodiversity, so hopefully you find that one really useful. Next one is show us some interventions for emotional support and understanding emotions. I know there are some fantastic resources, so I've just picked a couple out there for you. How do I run a short burst intervention for sentence writing? I would always go to colourful semantics. It's really important to set a SMART target for the child that you're going to be working with. Sentence structure is huge. So absolutely narrow it down to a very specific target in sentence writing before you start an intervention for that. Just, I think, bear in mind with sentence structure that no step is too small, because there are lots and lots of steps to good sentence writing. How can I ensure that information I pass on to teachers is actioned? It's communication all the time. If, for example, you've asked a teacher to put in a sloped writing board for a child because during the intervention it was found that that was really useful for them, And when you go to look in class, the slope writing board isn't there or isn't being used. Have that conversation with the teacher about why it's not being used. It might be that the child doesn't want to use it in the classroom. But definitely if the SENCO can insist that that's used, that's a really helpful route to go. Okay, the next question. Some children are reluctant to come. Yeah, some children will always be reluctant to come. I'm afraid that's the nature of the game, isn't it? Active learning can be great for improving engagement there. Give those outdoor learning opportunities a go. How many times should a child access the same intervention? Once towards the same target. If they're accessing an intervention for the second time, it cannot be towards the same target. So in one cycle of the graduated approach, they should be given the opportunity to meet one target. If they then go back into the same intervention, it should be with a new target, potentially an even smaller target, so they can show progress. Okay, rattled through those very quickly, sorry. So this was where, if we had any more questions.
Hi, Helen. Hi, Helen. We've had a few that have come through, so we've just added them to the Jamboard.
Oh, fab.
I don't know if you've just gone through the in-text messages or not, so I'm just
No, I haven't been looking, I'm afraid.
I'll read them to you, and I will let you have your view. You have a drink whilst I'll pick a long one to start with.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I'm still find myself staying out of my working hours to ensure planning is done and feedback is up to date. What suggestions do you have for this problem?
Cut the intervention time by 5 minutes and do your record keeping at the end of it. So if your session is meant to be a 20-minute handwriting session, do 15 minutes of handwriting and 5 minutes of records. Do it within the intervention time, and be honest about that with the teacher. Say, you know, it's a 20-minute intervention, but in order to make sure that the record keeping is absolutely on point, 5 minutes of that will be recording.
Thank you. I think that's a very good point. Talking about feedback to teacher, what happens if they just don't want to know?
It's really difficult, and I think it comes down to accountability. At the end of the day, they are responsible for the progress within the intervention. And if your record keeping shows that there was progress, it's up to them to then get the impact in class. If they are genuinely not following that through, that needs to go higher than the teacher. It needs to be brought up with somebody, the SENCO or senior leader, or if you have a mentor or a lead teaching assistant, somebody needs to tackle that, because a lot of work goes into interventions for it to potentially then be ignored. It's not okay that's ignored.
As a senior leader for the last 12, 13 years, I would second that, absolutely. Go straight to your senior leadership team. And if they pretend they're not listening, keep going, keep going, keep going. When did the R come to stand for relevance in place of realistic?
I think realistic and achievable were quite similar, so I think relevant kind of took over. Don't know for sure. I've
been in two different schools over the last couple of years, and they've used different words as well. So I think it's just one of those local sort of words that they just keep dropping in, don't they? That works for their area.
I think they're interchangeable.
Absolutely. Last couple now. Having the time to plan ahead is a great point. My timetable is so packed and only have once when the children are being dismissed from school as our PPA time. I think having a small time after PPA time as our PPA time. Unfortunately, sorry, I'm just trying to, thank you. Someone's just propping that into the Jamboard whilst I'm talking.
Oh,
so,
brilliant.
Hopefully I still find time difficult. Is there any ways around this? for me, it's going to senior leadership again.
Yeah,
personally.
absolutely. Your timetable absolutely has to be manageable, because as soon as it starts to feel unmanageable, we start to get overwhelmed in ourselves, but we also start to unintentionally potentially drop things. So we might go, oh, I can't fit that intervention in today with that child. And we all know that it's not a nice feeling, but sometimes we have to, because we have to catch up. That is slightly more easily remedied if timetables are manageable. So definitely going to senior leaders and saying, I cannot do all this and show impact. I cannot be successful in the interventions you want me. This time frame, I need time to plan. I need time to report. I need time with the teacher for PPA and discussions.
I agree, and I think that's probably just answered something that's just come in as well. Is why are we training specific interventions? Are we not given the opportunity to carry these out? I think that rings true against the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about time management, but not your time management. It's about whoever is giving you too much to do. They need to be told that it's not manageable.
Yeah, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. Absolutely, wholeheartedly agree. Will we get in trouble if we go and use our own money?
Well, I mean, I would like to think that any school, I know budgets are tight and I know things are difficult, but I would like to think that if it's a reasonable request for something that you absolutely 100% need for an intervention to be successful, the school absolutely must be supplying it.
Yeah, absolutely. And final question from this, and then I've got a surprise for you all, but I'm not telling you yet. I'm a volunteer / trainee TA and running my first phonics intervention next week. Any extra tips for running your first one? Thanks.
Prepare. Read as much as you can. If there's anything that you don't understand, whether it's a scripted intervention or one that's used in school by other teaching assistants, speak to as many people as you can. Find all the resources well in advance. And yeah, if you need specific support with an area, absolutely do it all before that first session. Yeah, ask as many people as you can and know the children that you're going to be working with so that nothing will trip you up on that first session. Absolutely,
thank you. And finally, before we finish, there will be certificates emailed out to everybody that's been here today. I've been scribbling all down your names, so I will send those out at some point over the next 24 to 48 hours. So there will be a certificate that comes with this. And finally, as a surprise, I've managed to get some Twinkl gift packs. So there's 5 gift packs. Everybody that's got their name that's been in there today, I will put into a draw, and 5 of you will win some tote bags and water bottles. So I will get those sent out to you via email. And if you could send me your addresses if you get one. Thank you very much for coming. Greatly appreciated to see over 127 people at one point. I think there was probably even more. Lisa and Shelley, I'm just going to stop the recording and then I'll take some questions, okay? But thank you very much for coming. And hopefully we'll see you next month when we do another teacher assistant teach meet. Take care of yourselves. Thank you very much.